'cause of you fools. We've been dancing with the devil way too long. I know it's fun, but get ready to pay your dues. Oh God, come back home. This crazy world is filled with liars and abusers. We need you now before we're too far gone. I hope one day they finally see the truth. God, we need you now.
Well, hello, patriots, freedom fighters across the country, throughout Saskatchewan, and around the world. It's been a little bit. I had some StreamYard maintenance to do before I could go live tonight. But good to see you. It's been a minute since we've gone live. Let me just fix that a little bit. So, I spoke with Salim earlier today, and we decided that tonight was probably a good night to come on and have a little discussion. And one of the things we talked about discussing was responsibility and how it's up to the people to force our politicians to do what we want them to do. That's our job. And so it's been, as I said, it's been a minute since we've been live. But that's one of the things that we think is important to discuss, and especially in terms of conservative supporters. None of the supporters seem to want to hold their party accountable. And I mean, the same can be said about the Liberal Party and its supporters. Nobody wants to hold them accountable either. But I guess in order to effectively hold them accountable, people need to have information. And, it's been my mission for the longest time to try to educate and pass along as much information as I can. But it seems that there's some people that just don't want to digest that information. They just want to ignore that information. And if we continue down this road of ignoring the information that's out there, then we're going to lose everything. So it really is up to us. It really is up to the people to become informed and then to turn around and hold our establishment parties accountable for the decisions that they've made on our behalf. And they haven't been good decisions. In fact, it goes against what a lot of us cherish: the values of freedom, liberty, justice, sovereignty, equality under the law, the rule of law, prosperity, and truth. Those, in this age of globalism, those are the values that are under attack. And so we need to inspire our neighbors, our co-workers, our friends, our family, and get them to grasp the situation that we're in, because very quickly we're going to end up losing everything that soldiers before us fought and died and gave the ultimate sacrifice defending. We're going to lose all of that. So I think we'll begin, and I'll bring Salim on. It's been a while, so I'll bring Salim on, and maybe he can add some more to that. Hello, my friend.
Hello, good evening, Mark. Good evening from southwestern Ontario, and to all my
Yeah,
friends and our friends.
good to see you. It's
Yeah,
been too long.
yeah, it's been quite some time. When were we together last? It was, I believe, in March sometime, isn't it? In the winter when,
Yeah, probably back in the winter before I got going with the business.
yeah, but I know Calgary was freezing. It was cold, 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 and I came up because we were doing a number of events in Calgary.
Right,
It was
right.
ahead of the in anticipation of the Alberta election.
Mm,
Was taking going to take. When did it take place? In June, I believe.
yeah,
It was in June in the summer,
yeah.
and then I came back and I was away. I think I had mentioned to you that I would be going away. I was away with my family,
Mm,
my wife, and
right,
up with my daughter. She was in Europe, in Italy. And so I was away for a month, May, June. So I was not here when the Alberta election happened. And I believe
right,
also there was, at the same time, we were anticipating there was a by election or series of by elections um, for the federal seats. There was one in Manitoba, and
right,
Maxime was seeking a seat in Manitoba in
right.
Port Lisgar in that election, and I was away, but I picked picked up the results while I was still traveling on the internet.
Sure. Yep.
Predictable result, disappointing to say the least, but it has to be analyzed in the context of what you were saying before you brought me on.
Mm. So, what are your thoughts?
Well, I mean, there's nothing changed radically in my thought. In fact, my thought has become darker, if I may say, gloomier, um, having come back from Europe a few weeks ago.
Mm.
Uh, Europe is a continent at war, um, and I got a sense of that by the apathy of the people there. That's a whole different discussion I think we need to have about this war, which is in effect a full spectrum war that is going on, and the people in Europe, who that is a continent, as I say, totally apathetic. And in fact, the opposite is happening, which is also expected, that the governments that have pushed this war are now facing a crisis domestically. It was only a week after I left France that France was burning right across the whole place. All
Right.
the major cities, Paris, Marseille, Toulon, Lyon, etc., were burning, and the government in Netherlands has fallen. There is a mass demonstration. The Dutch farmers are out, and the question is whether the result will be the same result after the election, which is expected in the summer or late summer, just as what is happening in Canada or what has happened in the United States. So this is a phenomena, Mark, that is not limited to Canada, but Canada is specific to you and me. We are Canadians, and so we need to talk about Canada. But this is a phenomena that is the phenomena of the complete disconnect between politics and the reality of the world in which people are operating,
Right.
living day to day, hyperinflation, violence. Um, you know, uh, for the first time I saw in Paris, I go to Paris every year. It's one of my favorite cities because I'm connected to Paris through my wife, who I met in Paris. And
Mm.
I dated her and we got married in Paris and so on and so forth. And she has a lot of friends and family members. My wife is from North Africa, but she studied in Paris and she practiced medicine in Paris before she moved to Canada.
Mm.
So I go every year or every second year. And this was the first time because I was traveling after 2019, this whole past 4 years had been a lockdown, vaccine mandate, all that we have gone through. So this was my sort of first vacation. Uh, and we traveled. And I saw in Paris what I hadn't seen before. The amount of people in the street, the level of poverty, the homelessness, the drug addiction, um, and that was the tinderbox that got ignited, and those of us who are connected and watching the news, global news, and following the news and seeing that that ignited, and Paris was burning and all the other cities were burning. I mean, it is estimated of several $billion euro damage to the property and
Right.
cars and so on and so forth. It was it was same, but possibly more aggravated, uh, as in the summer of 2020, United States was burning under BLM and Antifa, and all of us saw that, right? We saw what was happening in America just before the 2020 election. So here it is in the most advanced part of the world. We are talking about the collective West, the G7 countries,
Mm.
and Canada is one of the G7 countries.
Western civilization.
Yeah, this is a huge disconnect, and there is no reflection on about this and why it is in the media. And the media will not have any discussion because it is not going to tolerate any counter narrative that is the main narrative of the globalists, and which is completely left wing. Take Canada, for instance. They're not going to invite people like yourself or Maxime or myself to be part of any panel discussion where we have a view of the situation that is different from the mainstream narrative.
Right.
So this is not simply in Canada, this is across the collective West. And that tells us that, I mean, if I was listening.
I just wanted to show this um, in terms of the media and why the media does what they do. This is the SDG Media Compact, and this is made up of well over 400 members around the world, spanning 160 countries, 5 continents, with a combined audience of about 2 billion people worldwide, who have agreed to parrot and to push the agenda that the UN, an unelected, unaccountable foreign entity, is promoting. So this is why none of the mainstream media will talk about anything outside of, accomplishing these goals.
Right. I mean, and between you and I, in this little setup, relatively little, it is it's on the internet. We have been talking about this for the past 4 years,
Right.
2015,
Right.
and there are others who are talking about it. There is podcasts,
Mm.
I I was going to mention, Fox having fired Tucker Carlson for
Mm.
doing what you and I are doing. That is, they
Right.
will not tolerate anything that questions the mainstream media, that is the globalist agenda. And of course, UN Agenda 2030 is at the heart of the globalist agenda.
Right.
Anybody that raises questions, legitimate questions, and engages in a critical discussion is
Mm.
going to be deplatformed and censored and silenced. That's the first step. The next step is, whether they're going to be prosecuted.
Right.
That's the end of free speech, and that is what we are facing. That is, the American people are facing in United States, the country of First Amendment, and the Biden administration has been arresting people who are the whistleblowers,
Right.
crime and corruption
Mm.
that is right in our faces. That is in the faces of the American people. Just like to mention
Well,
one data point, this whole of finding cocaine inside the White House in the national security room, the room where the National Security Council meets. And this would have been and should have been and must be an issue that should have exploded. I mean, the question of people, of course, have no memory of what happened yesterday. So forget about memory going back 50 years.
Right.
The charge against President Nixon, who had won a massive election in 1972, his second term election.
Mm.
And then immediately the media broke the story about what became
Watergate.
the Watergate story, and he was driven out of office. And here there is cocaine in the White House, and everybody knows
Right.
who is following the news. And this is not a question of left and right. It is the Biden family. It is his son, Hunter Biden, who is
Mm.
engaged in.
Well, I would say it's the convergence of the left and the right, the fascists and the communists. That's what globalism is.
That's right. I mean, so that again, that's another discussion
Mm.
that is waiting for us to get into, because this whole issue that coming back to Canada, coming back to the United States,
Mm.
the Republicans are right wing or conservative, the Liberals, the Democrats are left wing, they're progressive. In Canada, the same thing, Liberal and the NDP is
Mm.
is left wing, and conservatives are
Doing the same thing on the other side.
right wing. And so this binary opposition, left right, is a setup like the World Wrestling Federation setup. You see two guys
Mm.
knocking each other off, and then they stand up and you don't see any bruises, you don't see anything
Right. Right.
for the next
Right.
round.
Right.
So
Well,
this
and the same thing is happening here too. I mean, you look at Archer Pulowski, who gave a sermon at Coots, Alberta, and they charged him with terrorism, punishable up to 10 years. He's going for his sentencing on August 9th. So, for simply giving a speech that references solidarity in Poland. Uh, it, Unbelievable.
well it's not unbelievable, but what it means is, I mean, that is incrementally, gradually, we have
Mm.
arrived where we have arrived. So where we have arrived is not that we are like Rip Van Winkle. There are Rip Van Winkles. I think 99% of Canadians are Rip Van Winkle. They're waking up, after a 20-year sleep and wondering where they are.
Right. Right.
But we are not. I mean, you and I, we are not the Rip Van Winkle. I mean, there is that people who are not Rip Van Winkle.
Sure.
We're not waking up to a situation when we went to sleep was different, and now we're waking up and saying, my God, what happened? No, this
Right.
was incremental shift that has taken place over the last 50 years and more.
Right.
So and
100%.
and that's what you're talking about. And so let's get back to it. The question of responsibility,
Mm.
the question of accountability. All of these are data point
Yeah.
goes to prove. I mean, it's like, person going to the doctor and complaining about whatever aspect of thing he's complaining about, and he goes through the full examination, and the doctor asks him, are you been drinking, or have you been smoking, or whatever, ask, and the guy says yes, and or the woman says yes. And when he says, well, there is a correlationship between what you have been doing and what is your illness here. Maybe, you have lung cancer, or you have liver
Mm.
cancer, or so on and so forth. So it did not happen all of a sudden. It was a incremental um, process in which the individual was involved in creating a situation now which he is down. And so the question of responsibility is coming back to us, to
Mm.
each individual, and I have been saying this all along. So I feel like I'm a broken record,
Me
that
too.
it is not about pointing fingers at the other. It is about taking and examining each one of us as honestly as we can.
Mm.
And because it begins with us, and the results that comes about is because of what we did or what we did not do. And so when 50 years we have basically watched this slide down to where we have arrived, that a man like Arthur Pulowski, talking about solidarity in Poland, the great movement that began the unraveling of the communist bloc, the
Yeah.
Warsaw Pact country, is now being called a terrorist because of his
Right.
association or reference to solidarity. Well, then the same government in Alberta, if they had an opportunity, they would arrest John Paul II and put him on trial because
Mm.
he was defending the solidarity movement,
Right.
and his defense of the solidarity movement was one of the elements of that tremendous public solidarity in Poland that led to the overthrow of the communist government. So, let's try Jean Paul II, even though people will say, oh, he's dead, he's gone. Well, all the fathers, all the priests, all the nuns of the schools that
Mm.
educated the native population, indigenous population, and tried to bring them along, into at that time what was at least in every sense considered that we are a Christian nation, we are a Christian civilization and culture, and to bring that knowledge, education, food, well, they've all been indicted. That
Right.
Canada is a country that has been engaged in genocide of Native Indians. Where is the genocide?
Mm.
Where has there been a genocide? So there is, on the one side, there is fabrication and lies and falsehood, which is the fabrication, lies, and falsehood that is now being thrown at Arthur Pawlowski and
Yep.
is going to be tried. So
Mm.
we cannot escape. And my view is that the Canadian people cannot plead innocence, cannot
Mm.
plead that they did not know, cannot plead
No.
is being done by the politician. No, it is not being done by the politician because you elected the politician.
Right.
You elected the parties. You
Right.
did not hold them accountable
Right.
for what they have done to you and your country, your
Mm.
family, your
Exactly.
community. So
Exactly.
that's what it comes back to at the end of the day. But it is not only at the end of the day, it is right at the beginning of
Mm.
life
Mm.
that if we do not take, response, that is our parents, our
Mm.
grandparents, that comes down to us, our education system. So as I've said all the time, that culture is upstream, politics is downstream. We cannot talk politics without talking first and
Culture.
foremost about culture.
100%.
And what has happened is that the collective West in Canada is another example of it that we are concerned about,
Mm.
has totally, totally corrupted its cultural foundation. That is, we, the people, have corrupted our
We've
culture.
allowed it to happen.
Yeah. We allowed the kind of cobwebs to cover up our rooms. We allowed the dirt. We allowed the turd. We allowed, all of that in our house. So, when we talk about the crisis of opioid in America,
Mm.
we are talking about us, the people. Nobody's coming and pushing it into our arms. We have
Right.
done,
Mm.
and so coming back to the election, yeah, only one half of the equation, and I would say the lesser half of the equation, is pointing fingers at the politician.
Mm.
I don't even want to mention the politician. It is so disgusting, so depraved and degraded.
Mm.
Our prime minister. Everybody knows. Everybody who's got half a brain knows. As Rush Limbaugh said, "With my brain tied behind my back."
Right. Right.
No, that this is the worst prime minister in the history of Canada of 160 plus years,
Mm.
right?
No question.
So, what are we going to talk about him? We
Mm.
have a minority government supported by an opposition leader, you know, who and his party members or his ethnic members are the terrorists, not Arthur Pawlowski. These are the
Right.
people
Right.
who engaged in terrorism, blew up an Air India 747, and are still proud about it. And they're running around in
Mm.
Toronto, in outskirts of Toronto, and of course in British Columbia,
Mm.
in Alberta. They're running around proudly, waving the flags of their political party in India. This is Canada, but
Calistanis.
they're waving the flag of the political party in India and telling the Canadian people that they need a homeland for Khalistani. And if they're not going to get a homeland for Khalistani, they're going to raise hell in Canada.
Right.
They're responsible for the murder of a prime minister in India.
Mm.
And of course, Canadians don't care.
Right.
They don't give a hoot.
Mm.
They elect these people. So
Right.
we have a minority government and we have a by-election.
Mm.
And we have a man who enough people know about him, despite the fact that the media will not cover him and will not report about him, who has been throughout this period, the last 4 or 5 years, with the people in the street, talking about the issues that are bread and butter issues, and in terms of our own responsibility about
Mm.
our financial situation as a country, about our immigration policies, about our UN Agenda 2030, and on and
Mm.
on and on. And he's running in a by-election in Manitoba, which is a western province, a prairie province. It's proud about its conservative heritage. And he can't get elected there. I'm talking about Maxime Bernier. Why?
Right.
Because it would be a vote splitting. Vote splitting in by-election.
All
A
right.
election is not about forming a government or
Mm.
overthrowing a government. I mean, even if the people of Portage Lisgar voted for a baboon and sent
Mm.
a baboon to Ottawa, that would not affect the numbers in the parliament.
Right.
The Liberal will still be the minority government, and the NDP will still be holding them and keeping them in power, and the Conservative would be, the party of, me too. We are
Right.
together with you. Whatever
Exactly. Yeah.
the government does,
Completely ineffective opposition.
yeah,
They haven't opposed anything.
precisely. Their only claim is that they will do it better. They will do UN Agenda
Yeah.
2030 better.
Right. Right.
They, they will spend money in Ukraine better. They will
Mm.
give more money better.
Yeah.
So there it is. And so here's an opportunity for the people in Portage Lisgar who are Canadians, who are Manitobans, who are sending a member to Ottawa, an opportunity to send a message with a man who's going to be the only one in a parliament of 338 people. If they elect him, he will be the only voice challenging
Right.
present state of affairs.
The only actual opposition or voice of opposition. Yeah.
And yet the people would not take that responsibility. So I feel that we are a lost cause. We as a country are a lost cause. This is a post-national state. It has no core identity. In other words, it is now a trash bin, a garbage can
Mm.
of the United Nations, and that's what is happening. And this prime minister and all the others in Ottawa are shoving it down the people in the throat of the people in Canada, and the people of Canada are quite happy with it. So that's my analysis.
Yeah. And I always relate this issue of responsibility to my neighborhood, the neighborhood I live in Saskatoon.
Right.
And if I walked through this neighborhood wanting to discuss globalism and Agenda 2030, people would look at me like I'm from another planet.
Yeah.
Right? Because they don't have the time nor the inclination to pay attention to anything that's happening politically around them. They're all too focused on, everyday life. And they walk to their car in the morning with their head down, they drive to work, they come home, they have dinner, they put their feet up and drink beer and watch hockey. That's what they do. That's their life. And they don't want to be troubled with the responsibility of politics and understanding what's happening to our country. And when that's going to happen, I don't know. If ever.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I don't want to use the word disappointed. It was predictable, and I had
Mm.
privately told you, I'm concerned about Arthur. And I'm concerned about all those people that you and I are friends with, in the
Yeah.
independent party movement, and how
Mm.
they were treated and thrown out. People like,
Right.
we don't have to mention names, people with whom we have been engaged in.
Mm.
Uh, and I was very concerned that the election results are going to be, as it turned out, just two parties, UCP and NDP in
Mm.
Alberta.
Well,
Uh,
let's talk a little bit about that. I mean, even federally, the federal conservative supporters, when you put the information in front of them, that they are the party, that the only party that is committed to Agenda 21, Agenda 2030. They're the party that made it law in 2008 in this country. When you show them this, they don't care. It's like they're cheering for a sports team. They're never going to give up their team blue because that's what they've always done. Even when you show them all of the information for them to make a reasonable decision, they don't care. They don't care. They won't listen. They won't have any of it. It's so incredibly frustrating, Salim.
yes, so you step back from there and ask yourself, yes, that's the political outcome. So it's like, I am, professionally, vocationally, my life, I'm now retired. I'm an academic. For 40 years, I was at the university. So teaching is my fundamental, apart from doing the research and writing and all in my subject area. So
Mm.
that is part of my profession, of my personal engagement. But as a teacher, and if I have not taught as a teacher my students the fundamentals, the three R's: arithmetic, writing, and reading, as they come through the system, we're talking about it. And if our students are failing in the three R's, in arithmetic, writing, and reading, how then, as a teacher, how does
Mm.
that, as an institution, that a school, college, and university, to expect that the graduating students whom we are giving them the degree are fit for the degree and qualify with the degree to which they're going into the world? you
Yeah.
know how do
They're not.
we see the outcome? So
Mm.
that's the fundamental, that is, education. And the three R's, if you don't have the three R's, you cannot be anything. You
Right.
put whatever brand you want. You're a pilot, you are a doctor, you are an engineer. It means nothing. It
Mm.
absolutely means nothing. It is simply handing out. So that's what our schools have become. They're talking about the individual respect, and there will be no gradation of students, because this that is discrimination and so
Mm.
on. We just hand out the medal. All right. So now you turn to the next institution. The next institution is the very foundation of any civilization, any culture. So we live in a world with different cultures and different civilization. So what civilization and culture do we as Canada belong to?
Mm.
Well, my history tells me I was not born in Canada. I came to Canada as a young adult in my early 20s.
Mm.
But the Canada I came to, and that Canada that made my home, that embraced me, I know from that history and my personal experience that Canada is a Christian country.
Right.
Where do I look to understand that Canada is a Christian country?
But is it still?
But that's where I'm driving at. Who
Right.
is responsible for that? Is
Mm.
the It is the churches, is the
Yes.
Christian leaders, is the priests,
Right.
the fathers, and so on and so forth. And I look around me in the over 50 years. This is my home, my country. My children were born here, you know, um, and I see that the institution of church has not only been hollowed out and emptied, it does not represent anything of Christianity. It has
Right.
been silent over the most fundamental issue during my lifetime. As I came in my early 20s, as I said, as a young adult, I went through the entire education system, that is the university education system
Mm.
in Canada. I'm a product of the Canadian university system. And then I lived my life through within the university system as a lecturer, as a professor. And that's my profession, 40 years. And I look around in this part of my life that
Mm.
on the most fundamental issue in in 2019, the 2019 election, with my friends, I went to Ottawa before the election because in March or June of 2019 was the 50th anniversary. Uh, that is 1969, 2019, the 50th anniversary of the legalization of abortion.
Mm.
The prime minister was Pierre Elliott Trudeau, but the bill that had come through was when he was the justice minister. So
Right.
I was there. There was a very large crowd of people there. Those who, what we describe them as pro-life. Which I find is a rather absurd term. How can you pro-life? It is about life. You, you can only be anti-life, and you're
Right.
alive. So anyhow, that's it, the pro-life.
I see a little bit of life within the Catholic Church, even just in Saskatoon. I'll give you an example. So they had a children's festival where they had, of course, drag shows, and the Catholic bishop in Saskatoon stood up and declared that they will not be sending their children to the children's festival this year because that that tent where they're hosting drag events exists. So they won't. They didn't send any of their children within the Catholic school system to that event. So I did see a little bit of life within the Catholic Church, being displayed in regards to that. So that made me feel better. That made me feel good. That at least somebody's doing something. Somebody's standing for something.
Yes, Mark. I mean, we can draw some minor satisfaction. I'm not
Yeah.
here jumping on anything, So a
Mm,
little candle is burning. But
mm,
Mahatma Gandhi said, how you fight darkness, that each one of us light a candle and then we obliterate darkness. But if
right.
there are lonely candles, and here it is, this evening, you and I are talking. So yes, there is some
Mm,
talk. And I think there in people's home, they are talking about it. But I'm talking in the
yes.
institutional term.
Mm,
This
100%.
country, a Christian country,
Mm,
adopted, a policy that has brought us from that point, the legalization of abortion, to where we are right now. There is no law in the defense of the most vulnerable life in the safest place on God's earth, that is the mother's womb. Life can be extinguished not only within the womb, but outside the womb, if that's what
right.
the mother
Sure. Mm,
wants. So, and there has been, I mean, if the church had been strong on this matter, we would have had a battle, we would have had a war on this matter. So that's one thing. You take the
mm,
whole spectrum,
right.
about traditional marriage. Why do we have to talk about traditional marriage? A marriage can only be a marriage between a man and a woman. But we
Right.
now don't even know what is a man and a woman. That is, again, back to the church.
Right.
uh, and so on and so forth. So this whole woke agenda that is now being shoved down our throat, and anybody question that can be prosecuted, is the complete failure of
Mm,
the institution, whose one and only role, it doesn't have any other role, because if it cannot fulfill that one and only role, it then doesn't amount to anything, and that is to defend the fundamental message of Christianity,
right.
right?
100%. Mm,
And they have failed. They've completely failed. Look at this
yes.
current Pope. When I see the picture of the Pope shaking hands with Zelensky,
Right.
it is the most appalling picture,
Mm,
inviting him to, to the Vatican and shaking hands with him. He's a murderer, but he's being represented by the collective West, that is Canada, United States, Britain, Germany,
Mm.
as a great defender of democracy and a great defender of all the values of democracy.
All right.
So as you put all of these things together, the main institution, you talk about the rule of law. Every member of the rule of law, the law enforcement agency that wears the uniform, takes an oath of office, and the oath of office
Mm.
to defend our Constitution. Well, were they defending our Constitution when they were arresting Arthur Pawlowski? When they were hammering away the freedom truckers,
Right.
were
Putting a
defending
fence around churches.
on which they took their oath of office? They didn't.
Mm. Right.
From the top, from the commanding officer of the RCMP, from the generals in the army, down
To our royal opposition,
yeah. But
who
I'm
said
talking
nothing.
of law. The people, I mean, the government can pass whatever they want to pass, but if it is not constitutionally,
Right.
kosher, I mean, you cannot pass a law that is open to constitutional challenge and then expect the law enforcement of agencies to enforce a law that is in complete contradiction with the Constitution.
Mm.
That is the defense of our freedom of right. I mean, what has happened to our Charter of Rights and Freedom that was exposed during the 2022 Freedom
Exactly.
Convoy? That
Right.
the entire Charter of Right and Freedom is nothing but ornamental. And I'm saying it politely, ornamental. It has no substance to it.
Right. 100%.
And so where were our law enforcement agencies? So
Mm.
every single institution of this great country that was an envy of the world is totally corrupted. So why should
Yes.
we simply point a finger at Daniel Steele, at the current prime minister, who should go nameless? I don't want to
Mm.
befoul my mouth by naming him, or the leader of the Conservative Party, or the leader of the NDP, or the leader of the Green Party, or the former prime minister. When the former prime minister, conservative prime minister, stands up in public, I'm talking about Brian Mulroney, and says what a great job the current prime minister has done, better
Yes.
than any other leader in the world.
Mm.
What are we to make of it? That was the prime minister, Brian Mulroney,
Mm.
who will be remembered for his own scandals and his own
Right.
corruption, the Air
Right.
Canada scandal,
Mm.
and everything around it, and other scandals.
Mm.
So when you have a teacher in the classroom who has not done his duty in getting his students
Mm.
to be able to effectively manage the 3 R's, to a member of a church who doesn't defend and stand up for the fundamental value of what the church represents, if you have a law enforcement officer at the federal level or the provincial level or at the city level, municipality level, who wears the uniform and goes around,
Mm.
bossing people, but is in violation of the constitutional
Right.
position of every single Canadian, the freedom of speech, the freedom of association, the freedom of religion. When you put all of them together, what are we? We are a banana republic, which is an insult to banana, because the
Right.
banana, when you buy and eat it, it gives you the taste that it promises to give you.
Mm. Right. 100%.
So this is the state of affairs we have come to. And if we do not acknowledge it collectively together as Canadians holding hands, we cannot expect any alteration of the system, because the system is who? We are the system.
Well, I've said this for a number of years. It's going to take a lot more pain for people to come up from their slumber. They have to be affected directly. It has to be dramatic. It has to be drastic. And that's the only way you're going to wake up enough people. And as they push forward with this agenda and more people are awakened, I compare. I look at rural Saskatchewan versus urban Saskatchewan. The level of awareness and awakeness in rural Saskatchewan is three times that it is in urban Saskatchewan, Saskatoon and Regina. And because they understand that their way of life is under attack, because there's been certain things done to them, there's a certain point of this agenda that is affecting them directly, but it's not touching the people that live in the urban sprawls.
Yeah, absolutely. And they're isolated. Their numbers are shrinking. Um,
Mm,
with the sort of policies of the federal government. I mean,
mm,
the question of immigration is not in public discussion.
right.
Anyone who engages in discussion of it is going to be and is uh, condemned
Racist.
as a racist, as a bigot. This is what has happened in Europe. So this is not. I mean, the immigrants are not at fault. I'm an immigrant.
Yeah.
And immigrants from whichever part of the world that is coming to the west, the immigration is not taking place from the west to the east.
Mm,
There's no immigration from
right.
Canada or America or any part of the collective west
Mm,
to China,
right.
to India.
Mm,
So it is, the traffic is only one way.
mm,
It is to the west. And so if the West is not going to control its own borders, its own sovereignty, its own resources, its own, you know, its responsibility, then that will continue. And when the immigrants are here,
mm,
again from whichever part, and they are not uh, encouraged to become Canadian, because they will ask, what does it mean to be a Canadian? And they are told Canadian means multiculturalism. You do whatever you want to do,
mm, right.
right? It's
Yep.
like going into a classroom and the student at whatever age, so you take the young kids, they're waiting to learn from the teacher the 3 R's, and
Mm,
instead of the 3 R's, the teacher are talking about about the woke agenda.
right. 100%.
So are the students responsible for what is happening, the result that is going to happen?
No.
And so this is where we come down to. It is a logical discussion that we need to have.
But
This
that's
problem is 50-year old. It's
but
not
even
book.
within our schools, Salim, that falls back onto the parents and their responsibility to ensure that school trustees and school boards are implementing a curriculum that is satisfactory in the parents idea of what's satisfactory, and the parents have to get re-engaged. They have to take back their responsibility to ensure that that's happening. And I mean, when I was growing up, my parents were heavily involved in the school system and ensuring that the curriculum that was being presented was valuable to me as a young student. And so somewhere along the line, people have forgotten that responsibility. They've abdicated that responsibility to our politicians who are running everything into the ground.
Yes, you're 100% right in a microcosm of the analysis. But the
Mm,
problem is at the macrocosm of the analysis.
right.
At the microcosm of the analysis, we're dealing again with each one of us and how we are responsible. So you're talking about your situation, I, my situation, my wife and I, we
Mm,
took I, my child, my son, and then my daughter, and with whatever resources we had at the time. We were young when they were born, and we pooled our resources together, and we took them to the alternative school. People are
yes.
doing homeschooling. Here we have in Ontario. I don't know what you have in Saskatchewan or in Alberta. We have what is called Kumon. Kumon is again, the basic fundamental teaching that is done at a private level. You register your children, you take your children there, and every day I took my daughter, I took my son when they were growing up, and my daughter is now in the university, second year going on. um, I took them through the elementary school till they went to high school to Kumo, and in those days it was not cheap. And I don't know what the fees are today, but I was paying, my wife and I were paying, for one daughter, $700 a month. So I'm paying my school taxes, which you are paying, in the municipal taxes, that we're supporting our school system, that we all have to pay. So we're paying our school taxes. In addition to that, I was, and I was not alone. I would go to Kumo, the school,
Mm.
which would be in a plaza. In our case, it was in a plaza, in a mall, in a building. And I would go there. I would carry my book, and I would sit there while my daughter went in to do her 3 hours, basically reading, writing, and arithmetic. And I would sit and read my book, and the parents around me all were immigrants like me,
Mm.
from
Mm.
Korea, from China, from India, from Africa. All of these parents, like myself, were concerned about our children because we all knew that they were not getting the full education
Mm.
and the deserving education they
Mm.
deserve. So all of these parents were basically hardworking, working class parents, truck
Right.
drivers, the women in the grocery stores and so on and so forth, um, middle class, lower middle class, and so on, and working class. And yet they were putting aside money for the children, and these money were not tax deductible because we
Mm.
were making a selection. So my question comes back to, you are absolutely right. The question is, where is the majority parents?
Right.
Now, when you get into the macrocosm of the analysis, 1969, let's take as a data point,
Mm.
when in Canada abortion became legalized by Prime Minister Trudeau, Pierre Elliott Trudeau. A decade before that was the coming of the pill.
Right.
In the 20th century, the second half of the 20th century, the one technological development that had the most profound effect socially was the development of the pill. It was beginning of the breakdown of the family. It
Right.
was all done in terms of the notion of liberating women, and liberating women is absolutely important.
Mm.
Okay, again, I'm talking personally, which is a matter of private, but if I were to write my
Sure.
memoir, I would talk about it. As a kid growing up in India, my father died when I was 10 years old. So it was
Mm.
my widow mother brought me up and my siblings, and I saw the pain and the anguish and the despair
Mm.
of my mother trying to survive as a widow in a world that is, I'm talking about that part of the world, South Asia, India,
Right.
where
Mm.
there is no female liberation. Or I'm talking about the 1950s and 60s.
Mm.
You know, there's no jobs for them. You know,
Mm.
so whatever was the little pension and the savings from my father, my mother had to save that, and with that, bring us up. I grew up with, there was no Goodwill store, but I grew up with, hand me down clothes and shoes from my older cousins and
Mm.
friends. And my mother went and collected them and brought them home
Right.
for us,
Right. Mm.
But the main thing my mother did was she sent us to school. I have
Mm.
two younger sisters. Both of them are professionals. Both of them became professional because of my
Mm.
mother. My mother was not a graduate from a school or a college,
Mm.
right? But it was a family background. And
Mm.
so, what I'm saying to you is that change. So, the liberation of the woman was very important. And I, seeing my mother growing up, the one thing in my own mind as a teenager and as a young
Mm.
adult, I resolved in my own mind, and here I'm
Mm.
going public with it so that I can share the story.
Right.
I resolved in my own mind that I will never marry a woman who will be dependent upon me.
Right.
I will marry a woman, if ever a woman wants to marry me, she will be an independent woman. She will be a professional woman,
Mm.
and God willing, my wife is a professional woman. You know,
Right. Mm.
she's not dependent upon me. If it is anyone dependent, I'm dependent upon her because she makes my home our
Right.
home,
Right.
right? So, so uh, uh, the people who grew up, who came of age in that macrocosmic analysis in the 60s and 70s, it was a pill. It was a women's movement. It was the feminist movement. And it changed the social structure. In the Western world, the change in social sector was the end of family, that is connected family. Remember,
Mm.
Quebec, a Catholic country, a Catholic society,
Mm.
the politics of Quebec as a Catholic society was connected with what was called the revenge of the cradle. That is,
Mm.
large families that would defend and protect
Right.
French tradition. So, for instance, Jean Chrétien, a former prime minister, came from a family of over a dozen children, a dozen brothers and sisters, large family, a family with 6, 7, 8 children. A Catholic family was a normal family.
Right.
Within one generation, that is the time that Jean Chrétien was born, and by the time that Jean Chrétien went to Ottawa as a young member of parliament, Quebec went through what is called the Quiet Revolution, which was a social revolution, with the family structure collapsed. Today, beginning in the late 1960s and 70s, Quebec entered the negative fertility rate,
Right.
right?
Right.
Women don't have children anymore.
Mm.
There's 8 billion plus population in the world.
By design.
And no, well, by design or not, but naturally over 8 billion people. All those 8 billion people, individual, are born of a woman,
Right.
not born of a man.
Right.
Whatever the number is, 8.1 billion, 8.2 billion, as you and I are speaking, they're born of a woman. They're not born of a man.
Mm.
Well, that little pill changed the entire situation,
Right.
you know.
Yep.
And so here we come. It was a collapse of the family. It became a nuclear family. With a nuclear family, that itself dissolved because of the sexual revolution that came, the
Mm.
individual responsibility that came. Marriages started falling apart. Two-thirds of marriages in contemporary Canada
Mm.
falls apart within a matter of the first decade of the marriage.
Right.
Right? These are
Right.
statistics that are right staring in our face. So
Right.
we have to again move from the microcosmic analysis to the macrocosmic analysis. And in the question of the macrocosmic analysis, who's responsible?
Mm.
We are responsible because we have basically, that is, our institutions have basically abandoned all fundamental principles for which those institutions exist.
But on a basic
Member.
fundamental level, um, these people who these elites call them whatever they want, parasites. They understand that humanity is corruptible, and they present to humanity this corruption, and humanity falls in line because we're corruptible.
Yeah, I mean, but that's when it comes to the question of education and it comes to the question of
Yes,
religion. So I began with
yes,
culture. You know,
yes.
the politics is the outcome of a
Mm.
culture. A culture that is successful will have a very strong political foundation. The West, the collective West, did not become the strong culture and civilization through 17, 18, 19 into the 20th century. It
Right.
became strong civilization. It became a magnet attracting people from around the world. Your
Mm.
ancestors came from Europe. I came from outside of North America, from Asia, and so
Mm.
on and so forth. It was a magnet that was attracting people. Why was it attracting people? Because the West, the collective West, and in particular North America, that is Canada and United States, was seen as the most successful civilization and culture based upon freedom as individual values. You
Right.
know, right? That was the foundational principle. Freedom as a concept was absolutely, in that sense, unique in the
In,
making.
in individualism.
Yeah, based on individual rights, freedom
Yes.
based upon individual rights. I
Yes.
mean, that's the American Constitution. Canadian Constitution hasn't got that. We have now established that. I wrote about it. You
Right.
circulated it. And
Yes.
it was a very political class who started, trying to rubbish the argument, but they cannot rubbish it.
Right.
But they're not going to stand up and debate it also.
Mm.
I don't want to mention the name. You might want to mention the name, but there it is,
Mm.
all phony, all hypocrites.
Yes.
I said, we can alter and begin the change by simply adding 7 words: we, the people, the will of the people.
Right. Derived by the will of
There's
the
no,
people.
there's no discussion on this,
Right.
I'm ready to stand up alone, single, and discuss this and debate it with anybody in this country. Let's see. Let's have a debate. If I'm wrong, I will admit it.
Right. I agree.
The difference
100%.
between Canada and the United States is precisely the American Constitution. Even as America has become, a post-constitutional republic, the sense of we the people are still there because the MAGA movement is over 100 million people.
Right.
Donald Trump is still standing and fighting about this, and people are rallying around him.
Mm.
But there's nothing in Canada of the same. There's nothing in Europe. So
Right.
my point is that is what attracted people from around the world.
Well, there is the Netherlands, and a number of the World Economic Forum parliamentarians have resigned. So that's a positive. So there is some positivity happening in the Netherlands.
Yeah,
that's-
in Netherlands it is happening because
But they were pushed. But they were really pushed, and that lit a fire, and that's what it's going to take here.
right. To take nothing away from the resistance that is now happening in America, in Netherlands, it's happening in Germany. If in Germany there's an election now, at any time now, within the next little while, the AFD is going to win. The SPD is finished. Olaf Scholz will be out of office. The only question is, what will be the wins of the other party, the Green Party and all, and whether they will form a coalition to stop the AFD.
Right.
AFD is now, running in numbers the same as Social Democratic Party. But the Western media is not reporting that.
No, of course not.
So what happened in France, if there's an election in France now or in the next few months, which I expect it might happen, then Marine Le Pen's party will very likely win. I mean, last year when the election was taking place, I talked about it in my podcast with Robert about Eric Zemmour and Marine Le Pen. I'm disappointed that they did not do as well as I was hoping that they would do.
Right.
Right? So, yes. But what I was pointing out is the constitutional foundation of we the people. It is only in the United States.
Right.
So the Germans migrated to the United States, the French migrated, and so on and so forth, and that has been corrupted. That has been destroyed. So the foundational principle is what we have to look to find why the political outcome is so degraded. And my argument is not complex. My argument, the complexity is the macrocosmic analysis, larger analysis. But at the heart of the matter, let me put it in very simple terms, a culture, a society that does not have at its heart, a beating heart, a sense of virtue. Virtue. What is virtue?
Actual virtue.
Yeah. If it doesn't have that, in a Christian society, it would be Christian virtue. But Christian virtue is also universal virtue. But it is framed within the context of the history and the language of the Bible, that is the New Testament, right? And if that has been rubbished and thrown aside, then there's a hole at the center of that society, and that hole in the center of society will suck out everything.
Right.
It is again,
There's no beating heart.
to give an analogy, virtue is like the GPS in your plane, in your car, in your ship. And if your GPS dies out, you're flying, you're driving, you're sailing,
Blind.
but you don't know where you're going. You don't
Right.
know what you're and what is your destination and how you're going to navigate, right? So we are now a society operating blindly. Our GPS has died. That is, there is no virtue. Our
Right.
churches are empty. Our priests don't talk, the fundamentals and hold
Right.
their people responsible by being responsible themselves.
Right.
Take the case. I mean, you pointing out, that Arthur Pawlowski's sentencing will take place next month,
August 9th. Yeah.
right? That he has been pronounced guilty, a terrorist, and this is a matter of now sentencing. So let me ask you the question: we are a country now of 40 million people. Let me put it in conservative terms. That at least two-thirds of that 40 million people are nominally, that they claim in name to be Christian.
Right.
That means there are Christian churches of all the denomination on the Protestant side, and then the denomination that is on the Catholic side, the churches, that represents that two-thirds of the population in name. Okay, in name, nominally.
Right.
Wouldn't you then expect the leaders of these churches, the pastors of these churches, from around Canada coming to Calgary and standing shoulder to shoulder with Arthur Pawlowski, as John Paul II did, going to Poland and standing with the people?
Right.
Wouldn't that,
In Lethbridge.
yeah,
So we're actually, yeah, it's in Lethbridge. So we're actually putting together. There's a convoy coming from northeastern British Columbia, and I'm putting together a convoy from Saskatoon
okay, so you are putting it.
to go
Heard-
and support
heard-
Archer. Yeah.
Have you heard any notice go out from any church authorities?
No, nothing.
Yeah, you answer my question then.
Right.
Here is a pastor, a Christian pastor, being prosecuted and persecuted in what is a Christian country, and the Christian leadership is silent.
Right.
But they're waving flags in my city, in London. I see flags, or have seen flags in churches, the blue and yellow flag of Ukraine.
Right.
And here, right in our country, the churches have been closed down and the pastors have been prosecuted, and there is no leadership from the church.
Right.
How do we explain that?
Right. Yeah.
And I will say to you that is the story when writ large explains the situation of Canada as a country and as a culture and as a civilization.
So I want to save that discussion for another evening.
Sure.
And so Salim, I would like to continue. I don't think Friday nights are going to work for me, just because it's the end of a long week. I think Sunday seems to be a better day for this.
My brother, you call and I respond.
Okay, so let's plan for next Sunday then, and we'll do this again, and we'll expand on some of the things that we talked about today.
My pleasure.
Thanks for joining us again, Salim. You truly are Canada's national treasure. Thank you.
Thank you for doing this. If you can spend an hour a week together,
Yes.
that is our share of what we are talking about
100%.
in putting out into the public. Okay.
Yep.
Thank you
Very
very much.
good. All right. Thanks, Salim.
Good night.
Take care. All right, so that's going to be a wrap for tonight. Yeah, he's such a wise man. How can you not love that guy? Phenomenal. Anyway, that's going to be a wrap. So thanks everyone for joining and sharing, and we'll see you next Sunday. Stay tuned. It'll be every Sunday from this point forward with Salim. Take care. Love each and every one of you. God bless. Bye.